Right, thank you. Sit down. So since this is my first time walking in, and Stuart's, I thought I'd let him make sure the sword was in place before I do.
Keeping the door open.
Yeah, let's check, sorry. Okay, welcome. My name is Councillor Adrian Gregson, I'm the Mayor of Worcester, and I'll just read the usual statement. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and others are reminded to use microphones when speaking, and you are advised to remain seated as the quality of the sound is much better when you do that. I'd like to hand over now to my city orator. You will have read that this year I've chosen to have an orator dating back to the Elizabethan period to say a few words before the formal commencement of business. Ian Craigan, who's over here.
Thank you, Adrian. Good evening. Circumstances nationally might be deemed to have overtaken my carefully prepared words. I hope that you will have the time and wit to fit them all together. Yesterday, I was delighted to be taken by a friend to the 4th day of the cricket test between England and India at Edgbaston. So often our team has lived up to the maxim of that great French philosopher La Rochefoucauld that we promise according to our hopes, but we act according to our fears. Here was a national team who banished fears and seemed determined to deliver all our hopes. Indeed, by midday today, they had done just that, winning by 7 wickets. The game began with a lusty rendition of Jerusalem, a rousing cry from that most radical of poets and thinkers, William Blake, to forego sleep, forego comfort and ease in order to bring about justice for all in England's green and pleasant land. The task of a city councillor may seem far removed from the visionary demands of La Rochefoucauld and William Blake, particularly when faced with agendas, reports, motions, minutes, interruptions, clarifications, and pedantry. But perhaps we can be encouraged and sustained as we work patiently and open-mindedly through the business of the day by other words of Blake from his Auguries of Innocence. To see the world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. It may be that helps you through the endless points of order. And so, to business.
Okay, we got any declarations of interest? Councillor Stephen.
I'm a landlord in Worcester on the item about renters' rights.
Councillor Chosky.
I'm employed by a major social housing provider. That's on the agenda as well, I'm afraid.
Councillor Stanley.
As with Councillor Stephen, I am a
Councillor Altaf.
Private landlord in Worcester.
Councillor Hassan.
Same as them, private landlord in Worcester.
Councillor Riaz.
Is a private landlord and a relative of a member who is affected by one of the decisions today.
Councillor Ditter. Councillor Gregson. Same. Okay. Can I just note that we've had apologies from absence from Councillor Bissett and also David Blake, Managing Director. Okay, so we move on then to the minutes, which are attached, page 2 sets of minutes, Annual Council and Extraordinary Council. Start with the Annual Council on page 1. Do I sign those? And are there any matters arising from those minutes? And the Extraordinary Council on page 7, can I sign those? Any matters arising from those? Great, thank you. We're moving on then to Mayor's communications. A number of things to alert you to. First of all, I want to pay my tribute and thanks to council officers who helped throughout the Jubilee period, a number of events, some of them at rather short notice, and also with the Gellabelt Park 100th anniversary event, which, despite being a washout, still, of course, had to have all the work put into it beforehand and on the day. Can I thank those of you who were able to attend the civic service, which I think went very well. Those people seemed to enjoy it and appreciate it. You'll have seen, obviously, the carnival was opened and on Saturday. And I've also been to the 10th anniversary of the Hive, which is a little bit like a busman's honeymoon, really. Especially when I was asked to say a few words about archives. A few things coming up that are worth mentioning, not just because I'll be there, but because they're worth attending on their own. The Magic of Middle-earth exhibition at the Museum and Art Gallery opens on the 9th of July. The Remembering Srebrenica memorial event, annual memorial event, is on Monday the 11th at 11 o'clock if people are free here at the Guildhall. The connections, the long-held traditions and connections between the City Council and St Swithin's Church are being reawakened now that they've had their restoration work done, and I'm going to what is a free organ recital on Friday the 15th, so if anybody wants to come along to that, then you'd be very welcome. That's at 1 o'clock. And we also have the 3 choirs in Hereford this year on the 3rd of July. I think this has already been announced, but the inaugural banquet will be Friday the 23rd of September. We're doing a little bit of work to see if we can organise something for our Ukrainian refugee guests, and that's looking like it's going to be a weekend early in August, but you'll get some more information about that as soon as we manage to get something underway. And finally, refreshments will be out in the assembly room at the end of this meeting if you've got the stamina for it. There are no public participation, so we're going to move straight to questions, and question 1 is Councillor Stephen Hodgson.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and saying how nice to be back in the council chamber again. I wasn't able to chair a meeting in here, but it's wonderful to be back, especially for the new members. Now on to my question. In the Queen's birthday, and this is the Councillor Mark Bayliss, in the Queen's birthday honours list that was published on the 1st of June 2022, how many recipients from the Worcester City Local Authority area, and how many nominations have been put forward through Worcester City Council over the past few years?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you to Stephen for the question. It's difficult to define the Worcester area because in the we're obviously not consulted on the list prior to it being published, and it simply says the location of the recipient. For instance, the only nomination that was or award that was given this year was to Sir Nicholas David Coleridge, CBE, of Wolverton Hall. Well, Wolverton, it lists him as Worcester, but he is not in Worcester, he is in Wychhaven, for instance. So it's difficult to give an exact answer. There were no nominations put forward through the City Council over the past 2 years, but then anybody and everybody can put nominations forward. What I would say, though, is that, in my view, nominations are always for those who've done outstanding work for the community in which they're based, and there has already been some comment on social media about this question and a scurrilous suggestion from the member who knows who I'm talking about, that Conservatives are asking questions about getting their friends' OBEs. Nothing could be further from the truth, and it's an outrageous comment and should be withdrawn.
Thank you.
Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, please, yes. Last year, in my mayoral role, I had the privilege of attending 2 award ceremonies in the Guildhall, which included a well-deserved British Empire Medal to Julia Micklewhite and her excellent work with ASPI, one of the charities I chose when I was mayor. I witnessed awards that were given to people from Wychhaven, recognising their endeavours during the COVID pandemic, but were disappointed nobody from the City of Worcester was recognised. I mentioned this lack of award towards the citizens to the Chief Executive. Will the leader ask our officers to communicate to members about how to nominate local people and also put in the resources as well, so that when nominations are put forward, they are properly entered into the official forms and that, and put forward so that they're received in the best way possible, so we can start seeing the large amount of voluntary people, because we also have a very good voluntary sector, those people getting the recognition that they deserve.
I totally agree with Councillor Hodgson that there are a huge number of people in Worcester who do great service for this community and deserve the recognition that an award from Her Majesty the Queen would bestow. And I would certainly support this council offering help and assistance to people who are thinking of making a nomination. As I said again, this is something that should be have wide support. The nomination system has enabled people across this country to gain recognition for their work, and I fully support it.
Thank you. Next question 2, Councillor Udall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is the Chair of the Communities Committee aware of the increasing number of complaints about services being provided by registered social landlords in the city? Complaints such as concerns about long delays to answer calls, inspections, repairs, inadequate responses, and about the lack of tenant participation. What action can he take to hold housing associations to account and to ensure an improvement in service delivery?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, the member, for his question. I'm absolutely aware of the huge and unacceptable number of complaints about poor levels of service that are being provided by registered social landlords in the city, and not only in my patch, but across the city. The Worcester News and all councillors' emails are littered with tenants complaining about everything from broken light bulbs to damp, to vermin, to infestations, to broken boilers and dodgy repairs. The behaviour is unacceptable, and it was the #1 issue on the doorstep in every block of flats that I managed to canvass in over the last election campaign. RSLs have failed to serve the residents of the city, and they need to be held accountable. And that's why, part of my pledge, Mr. Mayor, to tackle this issue, I've invited Platform Housing to the next Communities Committee so that members can ask them to answer the issues and complaints of their constituents. Of course, members of the public are also welcome to attend and can register to speak if they wish.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it's worth saying at this point that only today I've received 13 complaints online about services being provided by housing providers in Worcester. Does he share my concern about the lack of any adequate local tenancy voice in the decision-making process of local housing associations, the lack of tenants on housing association boards, and the lack of public accountability, especially when their decisions have an impact on non-tenants?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, absolutely, and I invite all the members to attend the Communities Committee on the 19th of July so that they are able to ask those very questions. Since our own own representation on RSL boards has all but disappeared, RSLs have been acting in an unprofessional manner to our residents. So much so that there have been several instances of tenants having mental breakdowns on the verge of committing suicide to the lack of an action, and their complaints have been falling on deaf ears. Having first-hand experience, Mr Mayor, of these issues and witnessing self-harm, the police having to deal with a larger number of these issues that are first-hand in RSL-owned properties, there is an undeniable link, and contributory link to mental health and the well-being that is being triggered by complaints not being dealt with sufficiently and quickly, that have been built up over time because of a failure to act, and some of them are legitimately due to COVID. Over the last month, I intervened in a case where a resident was suffering because his complaint that to get more light into his property had gone unheard for months. One small interaction that took less than 20 minutes to solve by cutting a branch of a tree to allow light to flood into the living room has now meant that this person is able to enjoy the better quality of life as a result. Small actions, but big consequences, Mr Mayor. This is a clear message to all RSLs in the city that things have to change, and we will do whatever it is in our power to ensure that our residents get the service they deserve. This goes out to all RSLs in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Question number 3, Councillor Udall, Chair of Communities.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Does the Chair of the Communities Committee agree with me that inclusive public access to culture and entertainment is important?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for the member for his question. Yes, inclusive public access, Mr Mayor, and to culture and entertainment is vitally important if we are to ensure no one is disadvantaged from accessing it. Our appointment of an equalities and champion and our EDI strategy, which is being made public for all, it seeks to root out any deficiencies and things that have slipped out of the net. And I commend our officers and members for their valuable input into this. Rest assured, no one is deliberately withheld from accessing anything the City Council provide, and I hope that this is the case for most of our city. Thank you.
Councillor Udall.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Was the Chair as shocked and as surprised as I was by the attacks and criticism of the Deputy Labour Party leader, Angela Rayner, by sections of the media and the Deputy Prime Minister for attending an opera, somehow suggesting that an opera was not a place for a working-class woman to attend? Does he, like me, reject such snobbery and believe we can all enjoy all forms of culture? Will he therefore investigate supporting and organising a free opera concert for all Worcester people to attend, preferably in Cripplegate Park, bringing culture, entertainment and fun back to the people of Worcester?
Thank you for to the member for his question. I mean, I think the important thing to recognise here is about stereotypes and other things that are at play here. That only certain people are allowed to access certain types of culture or sport. It's the same in Formula 1, tennis, polo, as it is with the opera, the theatres and the arts. We must change this narrative and make our arts and sports more inclusive and open to all. This classism isn't acceptable in any way, shape or form, and shows an arrogant snobbery in its most vulgar form, and yet again highlighting how out of touch with reality and the general public ministers of this government are, and that the born-to-rule mentality with a lack of accountability is very much alive and kicking in government. We'll fight to eradicate it in whatever shape and wherever we find it. I'll take away your suggestions and ask officers regarding the organisation of an opera. On a lighter note, Mr Mayor, I wonder if the member would like to take centre stage as the tenor, like Pavarotti style, and there are comparables, of course, of both being loud, large, and loving a cornetto or two.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll move on then to question 4, Councillor Lawrenson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question to the joint leader of the council, Councillor Mark Bayliss. The Police Crime Sentencing in Courts Act came into force last week. Do you agree with Jessie Norman MP, who wrote in a letter to the Prime Minister on 6th of June, that no genuinely Conservative government should have supported the recent ban on noisy protest?
Interesting. I think we've debated this one, Neil, several times. 3 times, is it? Thank you. I think there is a balance to be struck in this area. Noisy protest itself, I don't have a huge problem with, but some of the other aspects of the Police Crime and Sentencing in Courts Act, I think were very needed to tackle some levels of disturbance and radicalism that were deeply damaging to thousands of people who had nothing to do with the issue, such as people gluing themselves to trains. And those are clearly issues that need to be taken very seriously. Noisy protest per se should be allowed, and I believe will continue to be allowed. But whether it is egregious, continuous, and somebody shouting stop Brexit for years outside of Parliament, I think there does need to be some action taken eventually. But I'd hope that the police use this power very sparingly and only when all other actions have been exhausted.
Supplementary, Councillor?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the answer. Yes, I do have a supplementary. Just as a short preface, you mentioned people gluing themselves to trains. I think suffragettes chained themselves to gates, and yet Harriet Baldwin, the MP for Malvern, has recently unveiled a blue plaque celebrating a local suffragette. So there seems to be a level of historical hypocrisy there. The Good Law Project has stated that while this legislation is almost explicitly introduced to target particular organisations such as Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain, the removal of fundamental rights will apply across the board. That is for all of us. And according to the Cambridge Dictionary, fascism is a system in which political opposition is not allowed. So when are you going to clearly and loudly oppose this attack on our democracy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hope the member wasn't implying that I was a fascist. I hope that we have a relationship that's long enough and established enough that that wasn't the case. I shall certainly take it as such. I think, as we have seen this very evening, a dissent is always allowed and enabled in this country, and we have a long and proud history of it. I will take issue with the point he made about people chaining themselves to railings. I don't think that put thousands of people's livelihoods at risk. I think it was a personal action in those cases that were making a statement. I think gluing yourself to a passing train, destroying people's livelihoods, or sitting in front of thousands of innocent drivers and bus users and other travellers and destroying their livelihoods, I think is a step too far for protest. And I think we probably differ on that view, but I'm confident and secure in my knowledge that those actions do need appropriate reaction, and that's what this bill does, or act as it now is, does.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Lamb, question 5.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my question is to the Chair of the Communities Committee. The Housing and Planning Act 2016 extended rent repayment orders to cover illegal eviction, breach of a banning order and certain other specified offences. It came into force in April 2017. I believe that a rent repayment order, or RRO, requires repayment of rent or housing benefit or the housing costs element of universal credit paid in respect of a tenancy or licence by a landlord or agent who has committed a particular offence listed in the legislation? How many times has Worcester City Council exercised its right as a local housing authority under the Act to apply for a rent repayment order?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thank the member for his question. The simple answer is no. Worcester City Council has not yet today. No enforcement or rent repayment orders have been issued from the City Council. Now, as you know, rent repayment orders are granted by residential property tribunals where the application is received by the local housing authority, and they must be granted if a landlord is convicted of a relevant offence. If there is no conviction, they can grant one if satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that the landlord has committed the offence. RROs are capped at a maximum of 12 months' rent, and funds received by the local housing authority under this order can only be used for the enforcement functions in a private rented sector. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. This legislation is not widely known outside of housing experts. The occupiers of rented properties are therefore unlikely to initiate such an application on their own. Could you investigate whether the council could publicise rent repayment orders on its tenants' information pages and consider helping tenants to claim back rent through rent repayment orders when they are eligible to do so?
Thank the member for the supplementary. I must draw the member's attention to the article today in Worcester's News that landlords in Worcester have been named the second best in the UK. Take it with a pinch of salt, but analysis has related that only 3.3% of Worcester's tweets have included a complaint against landlords. So we are doing well in terms of that. The vast majority of landlords in the city are good with their tenants and have got a really good relationship and maintain those relationships. However, the report does acknowledge that part of the problem is, because of the lack of enforcement, is that fear of reprisals or comebacks from tenants if they raise issues against their landlords, whether they be RSL or private landlords. Too often, tenants have to put up with atrocious behaviour of rogue landlords and professional ones that also. And there has to be a process of anonymity involved so that whistleblowers are protected from reprisal. Every tenant has a right to safe, decent housing, and if terms and conditions and standards are not met by landlords, then tenants must be able to demand a refund, and is part of our remit to ensure tenants know those rights. So I'll follow up those concerns with officers and make sure that that information is disseminated amongst the private landlord sector.
Thank you. Question 6, welcome back, Councillor Udall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the chair of the Communities Committee confirm how many Worcester residents are currently waiting on the City Council housing list? How many houses are available in Worcester in RSL stocks? And what is the average weekly availability of houses suitable for allocation?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank the member for his question. Currently, there are 2,792 live applicants that have been banded according with the adopted banding structure. Band 1, priority, which is 406. Band 2, high housing need, 590. Band 3, low housing need, 393. Band 4, reduced preferred banding, 67. And Band 5, eligible applicants that do not meet specific criteria, 1,336. As the second part of that question, how many houses are available in Worcester's RSL stock? The current RSL stock position is 8,133, with the largest three: Platform, 5,475, which accounts for 67%, Citizen Housing, 1,545, which is 19%, and Sanctuary, 405.
Can the Chair of Communities tell me what he is doing about the shocking findings highlighted in the ARC housing report that shows how far behind we are in building or acquiring housing stock for social renting, and what can he and the council do to help those that have been waiting on the housing register for many years?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to the member for the supplementary. I mean, it's a well-known fact we just haven't got enough houses and we're not building enough houses. The ARC housing report has highlighted on numerous occasions our failure to enable that housing to happen within Worcester. We are short of 453 houses per year in building, so we are far, far behind. And up to the top three bandings that I've just highlighted you, the number of them, realistically, none of those people will ever have a chance of finding a home within Worcester. If you're not in Gold or Priority Plus, the stark reality is it will be very, very difficult for us to do that. And part of our remit as a communities committee, and having discussed this with the Vice Chair, is that we've asked officers look into a fresh approach of how we band our system, how we classify those people in vulnerable needs, and reorder it so that there is a better chance if you're on a lower housing band to enable to get a property. So that's one of the things that we can do. Of course, we have to work with our colleagues in planning and in PED to ensure that there's a hive mind in terms of thinking when we're approving planning applications and in terms of our strategy across the city, so that we're thinking in one, so that every possible intervention that we can make within this city enables us to ensure that the social housing stock that is being outlined in those planning permissions is delivered. And we have to think as one council and as one department to ensure that is happening. So the minor things that, in short, it's not going to be a quick win, but hopefully the housing recommendations, which all members have a chance to feed into, which will come at a later committee later on this year, will feed back into the strategic measures that we have to take as a council in order to up our game and ensure that everybody has the opportunity for some social, for a home and a roof over their heads.
Thank you. That concludes the questions. I'll just take a quick straw poll. Do people think that the questioners should read it out or taken as read on the order paper? Well, I thought people would put their hand up instead of mutter. But never mind. Okay, fine. That's okay. That's a good point. It's a fair point. Yeah. I was just perturbed by the number of people who were tapping away on the electronic devices and not apparently taking that much notice. So I thought I'd ask. Notice is a motion then. We'll move on to agenda item 7. The first one on there is the cost of living motion proposed by Councillor Olcott, please.
Mr Mayor, thank you. Council, good evening. This evening I would just like to highlight obviously what I see as a very real cost of living crisis that we have at the moment. Energy, fuel and food prices are all certainly soaring, and I hope everyone's taken the time to read the motion. But just to highlight a few more numbers, looking at the ONS Office for National Statistics, the ONS stats in June 2022, they refer to UK inflation. It reached a 40-year high in April, and the Consumer Prices Index rose by 9% in the 12 months to April 2022. And when you look at the ONS also done a report on the rising cost of living and its impacts on individuals in Great Britain between November 21 and March 22. And around 9 in 10, which is 87% of adults, have reported an increase in their cost of living compared to the previous month in March. And nearly a quarter, 23% of adults at that point, reported that it was difficult or very difficult to pay their usual household bills. Following on from that, focusing on the latest period, among those who pay energy bills, around 4 in 10 at that point reported that it was very or somewhat difficult to afford the energy bills in March 2022. And of adults currently paying off a mortgage and or a loan or rent or shared ownership, 30% reported that it was very or somewhat difficult to afford housing costs, and 3% claimed to be behind on rent or mortgage. And that is obviously at that point in time. And if I can then just refer briefly to, we all know Martin Lewis, the money saving expert. He's put out his own cost of living crisis. He's put out a survival guide, and obviously he's commented that the UK is amid a cost of living crisis. Prices are rising at rates we haven't seen since the 1970s. Energy, broadband, water, council tax, fuel and more. And so he's written a guide to surviving. And when I looked today at an article from The Independent, and they refer to Downing Street, they said that Downing Street has made a decision to hold televised briefings in the same way as during the COVID-19 crisis. So I think there really is a genuine cost of living crisis. I'm not being dramatic, and I would just like Council to acknowledge that and support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Denham.
Thank you. There is no doubt we are in a cost of living emergency, as this motion says. Anyone who has been to the petrol pump knows. Everyone on a fixed budget knows. The facts, just a few facts in the motion, are absolutely frightening. We need an emergency response from government which matches the scale of the problem. Cutting VAT on home energy bills would make a huge difference to pensioners and others. It would reduce the fear of putting the heating on when the weather gets colder. It would also help to reduce inflation. Government is actually benefiting at the moment from extra VAT income due to the increase in energy costs. It's a hidden increase in taxation on those who can least afford it. We need a more coherent approach for a long-term energy policy, carbon reduction, and an economy that works for all. The sudden ending of the pensions triple lock was a surprise to most people, and it happened just as inflation starts to rocket. So the government has pulled the security rug from under pensioners' feet. When governments break their promises, it reflects badly on all politicians at every level. Pensioners trusted the government to look after them through tough times. So I'm speaking up today for the Worcester residents who trust me to fight their corner. I second this motion.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor, I think Councillor Bayliss was first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, there can be no doubt that the level of inflation in this country at the moment is making the cost of living very difficult, and that we are indeed, and we would support a recognition of that, even declaring a cost of living emergency, although it is becoming the regular thing for any issue and all issues to be referred to as an emergency. I think this would be the third or fourth one we've had in a year. I think the motion fails, however, to recognise the significant number of things that this government has done to address this issue already. And I thought the council, just so those who might have missed some of these could be better informed. The government has, of course, given a £150 grant to all council tax payers in bands A to D, which this council has distributed. It's also given this council £300,000 to distribute to those in need outside the A to D band system. It has given a £400 non-returnable grant to all domestic energy consumers. 28 million households will be receiving that later this year. Those on benefits are receiving £650. There's an extra £300 for all pensioner households. 8 million pensioner households are going to receive an extra £300 on top of either the 400 or the 650. There's £150 extra for all households with people with a disability. There is a £1 billion household support fund distributed by local authorities to support food, clothing and utility bills. There has been the raising of the national insurance threshold to £12,570 from this July, which is saving the typical employee £330 per year. And there's been a reducing of the universal credit taper from 63% to 55%. Now, that sounds like a pretty significant package to me. It also sounds like pretty significant, and in a majority of cases, well targeted. My concerns and the reasons I can't support this motion is because of some of the detail, which I think is just wrong-headed. The reduction in VAT from 20 to 17.5% would be on all goods for everybody, whether you need it or not. On Lamborghinis, on racehorses, on Range Rovers, on anything you buy, we would be reducing VAT from 20% to 17.5%. We'd be giving the very richest a reduction in everything and anything they buy. What we need, if you want to spend more money and you want whoever is the Chancellor to spend more money, is better policy, focused on those in real need, not a uniform tax reduction for every single soul who benefits from this. So you need better targeting, and I think the government has shown in those list of policies a whole range of ways in which they can be done. I'm not saying that that's exhaustive, by the way. There may be other things that need to be done and that we would support. But this blanket approach of simply cutting VAT is not the right way forward. So I'm afraid on that basis, we won't be able to support this move tonight. We would ask, however, that you recognise that there has been an awful lot that has been done and that more targeted support may well be necessary. I just, as a Remainer, I do just chuckle, however, at the Lib Dems bringing forward a motion calling for VAT to be reduced from 5% to 0%. Of course, as a member of the European Union, we wouldn't have been able to have done that anyway. And it is slightly ironic that the Lib Dems are particularly calling for this. But having put that aside, that is a policy that could be brought forward, and I would like to see the policy implications of that before I'd support it. There is more to do. The cost of living crisis is biting and causing pain. The government has done a lot, and there was more to do. But on this one, the blunt instrument of VAT is not the right policy.
Thank you. Councillor Stephen.
Thank you. I very much support and the spirit of this motion. You cannot take literally thousands of pounds out of people's pockets and not cause a massive problem for our economy and also for those who are in the most need in this country. There are many people who are going to have to choose between heating and eating. I do have a problem, though, that removing VAT and just removing VAT off fuel could cause some unintended consequences, particularly in the long term. I understand why the raiser of the motion has put this, because it is probably a very quick and very easy thing to do. But there are probably other ways and better ways to target this money, because if you think about it, if you reduce VAT on fuel, you are going to be giving a tax cut to the millionaire mansion owner, those who have got a swimming pool, those who have very high and profligate energy usage, and you're giving them a tax cut. And I don't think that's a very good idea. But as I say, I don't really want to get too bogged down into the nitty-gritty detail. I think the spirit of the motion is a good one, and I think it's an excellent thing to try to tackle the cost of living crisis. All I would ask for is a small amendment that would allow us, I believe, to support it. And that is that in the line where it says that we would reduce VAT from 5% to 0%, that there is a small amendment there, which would be for 1 year only, to then enable other measures to come forward. And there are very many measures which could be brought forward. For example, reinstating or doubling the universal credit, the £20 a week, up to £40 a week for those most in need. We are living in a climate emergency, and I don't think it's right that we just take away the tax on fuel for an indeterminate amount of time without saying that it is for a temporary measure and then bring in other measures for helping people with cost of living crisis. So I'd like to put that amendment.
Thank you. Is that amendment seconded?
Thank you. And I reserve my right to
Do you
speak.
want to speak now?
No, I reserve my right to speak. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. So the first thing I think is to ask the mover of the motion whether she wants to accept that amendment or not.
Mayor, thank you. I think with the nature of
It's a
this
simple yes
motion...
or no, Mel.
Okay, no.
Okay, thank you. All right, then we'll move on to a debate on the amendment. Who would like to speak on the amendment? Nobody wants to speak on the amendment.
Anyone?
Fair enough, right? Okay, well, let's move straight to the vote then. But we need to agree the amendment first. Yeah. So can we have those who are in favour of the amendment? Louis, would you mind just reading it again for us, please?
So just so we're very clear what you're voting for, in the line where it says immediately remove the standard rate of VAT is to add the 3 words for this year. So it would now say immediately, comma, for this year, comma, remove the standard rate of VAT on fuel from 5%.
Can we have
to
one
0%.
meeting, please, Councillor Ditter? I can't hear Councillor Stephen.
Do you want me to repeat
Just
that?
be clear again, please, Councillor Stephen,
Okay.
because that's not what you said when you were speaking earlier.
Okay, so the amendment would be to change it from immediately remove the standard rate of VAT to add 3 words for this year. So it would say immediately, comma, for this year, comma, remove the standard rate of VAT on fuel.
Okay, is everybody clear what they're voting for?
It's adding for this year. For this year. For 1 year.
No,
copying-
to be clear, the councillor has moved an amendment, which now means he would like the motion to read immediately for this year, remove the standard rate of VAT on fuel. The simple question is whether you're prepared to vote for that, to support that or not, isn't it? So can I put that amendment to the vote? Those in favour of that amendment, please. And against? And abstentions? Okay, that amendment falls. And we'll go back to the substantive motion then. And I've got Councillor Agar on the list next.
I'll vote for it anyway.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to speak on the substantive motion on more or less on one point, which is the effect that this is having on children. In this week's Sunday Times, Camilla Kindon, President of the Royal College of Paediatricians and Child Health, was quoted as warning of a generational impact on children's health this winter, as families struggle to feed their children and heat their homes. I would suggest that the problem will hit those families earlier than that. We already know that food vouchers will only be available to families on very low incomes for 2 weeks of the summer holidays. In other words, those children will go hungry for the remaining 4 to 5 weeks, much of the time, during the school holidays this summer. As Camilla Kingdon pointed out, the reality of our times is that feeding your children a healthy diet is an extraordinary challenge. The number of children diagnosed with malnutrition by hospital doctors more than doubled between 2008 and 2020. The rising cost of healthy food means that children can become undernourished or obese. Dr. Kingdon noted that a pack of Gala apples in Tesco's actually cost £1.70 while a pack of jam donuts cost 80 pence. I think you can see the point there. The truth is that it is expensive to put healthy food on the table sometimes. It's much cheaper to eat chicken nuggets and chips than fresh fruit and veg, and doctors are reporting that more parents are struggling to afford the cost of bringing children to hospital appointments. In addition, COVID has accelerated health inequality. It's an inequality that will follow children into adulthood, causing poorer health and shorter lives for many. There is very robust evidence that says if you grow up in poverty, your healthy life expectancy is significantly reduced. The Archives of Disease in Childhood published a study showing an unprecedented rise in infant mortality between 2013 and 2017, which only happened in the most deprived parts of the UK. Babies in these areas were twice as likely to die as those in less deprived areas. Let's hope the government's proposed white paper on health disparities pays more than the usual lip service to solving this pressing problem. And I was relieved to hear the leader of the council say that we do have a crisis. We do. Because every time I raise the matter of holiday hunger and health inequality, and I did so repeatedly in committee at the county council and at the council itself, I was told by county Tories that the solution was to get people into work. And of course, in many respects, that's true, but it is a long-term solution in many ways. And this crisis that we are in now has happened at a time of high employment. And crises need faster solutions than long-term suggestions. And if you'll permit me a slight unparliamentary moment, I remember a pithy motto of one lecturer's door at my university, and it said, when you're up to your arse in alligators, it's no time to think of draining the swamp. Let's get on with it, for goodness sake. And let's all agree that we must do something. I don't need to say much about pensioners, I don't think, and job seekers' allowance is at an all-time low. It's 13% of average pay. It's pathetic, and I think we all know that it is. So, you know, there are lots of pensioners on state pensions who won't cope this year. And £150 one-off payment to all of us to help us with our fuel bills is not going to help much when the government is taking away more than twice that amount from less well-off pensioners. I really do hope the government will think twice about their policies. I hope very much that we will think twice about ours. So I support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Nobody else indicated earlier. Are there any new indications of speaking? Can't see any. Okay, then we'll move to the vote on the substantive motion then, which is unamended.
Thank you.
Do you want a right of reply, Councillor Olcott?
Just a very brief one. Just like to comment on, obviously, I know the government has put some measures in place already, but examples such as the £150 off council tax for bands A to D, again, as with many of those policies, that has benefited people who have 2 or more plus homes. So it isn't perfect, but I think it's something for now, and we do need to do something now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move to the vote, and can I see those in favour of the motion, please? Thank you. Who's against? And abstentions? Thank you very much. That motion is carried. We'll move on to motion 2. Dines Green Community Police Post to be proposed by Councillor User.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I ask you to support this motion in a last-minute attempt to save the Dines Green Police Post from being disposed of and closed. For your information, the Police and Crime Commissioner is currently consulting on his estate strategy for 2021 to 26, and included, tucked away at the end of the report, where hardly anybody would notice, is a proposal to close and dispose of the Dines Green Police Post. Dines Green Police Post does not just serve Dines Green, it serves the whole of the west side of Worcester, St John's, Bedwardine and St Clement's. It also serves a ring of parishes between the city and Malvern. It's an important police post which should be expanded and not closed. When I was first elected as a St John's councillor, the post was open to the public, and included there was an inspector, a sergeant and several police constables. It's now served by the superb PC Slaymaker and just 3 PCSOs. If the closure happens, there will be no permanent police presence in an area of Worcester with a population in excess of 30,000 people. It may not be open all the time, but it's a comfort blanket. People know it's there, they know it exists, they know the police will be using the post, and they know it has a purpose. The police post also manages the 2 PCSOs who support the university. They have a unique understanding of the problems associated with a large student population, and the post is used to enable that support to be proactive. It's used for regular meetings with members of the community and the public. It's a safe place in an emergency and ensures that officers are safe and can be seen in the heart of St John's. It's a growing community, especially with the western expansion of the city. The proposed closure, therefore, is short-sighted, badly timed and a strategic mistake. For your information, Mr Mayor, I have some crime figures for the area. In the last 12 months, in St John's, Bedwardine and St Clements, we have seen 647 sexual and violent offences, 432 antisocial behaviour offences, 133 criminal damage by arson, 115 public order offences, 113 shoplifting offences, 100 other thefts, 85 vehicle crimes, 83 burglaries, 34 drugs offences, 30 other specific crimes, 17 robberies, 16 possessions of a weapon, 15 bicycle thefts, and 7 thefts from a person or a mugging. This does not include traffic offences such as speeding and obstruction or responding to road traffic accidents, or work with schools and the university and supporting housing associations and public protection. This is a lot of work for 1 police constable and 3 PCSOs to manage, as well as doing other regular patrols for assistance and work in the community. They need a permanent base, a home for policing. The police post is in an area recently described as being in the top 10% of most deprived communities in the country. The proposal by the police commissioner by this single act of vandalism would make the community even more deprived, at greater risk and unprotected. It's a kick in the teeth to Dines Green. We need more investment, not less. We need more police, not less. We need more assurance, not less. We need more community activity, not less. So, Mr Mayor, I ask you to support this motion and to send a united message to the police commissioner to think again, to not close Dines Green, but to invest and expand the post. I invite him to come to St John's, work a shift with local officers, speak to local councillors, see the situation and speak to the local people and to reconsider. Mr Mayor, I invite you as a council to support our local police and to save Dines Green Police Post from closure and disposal. I move.
Thank you, Councillor. Did you say Slaymaker? Yes. Sounds like something out of Robocop. He was obviously... I'm looking for a seconder. Councillor Amos.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm very happy to second this motion. This issue is not about party politics, but about policing, and proper policing that the public needs and expects. I can see no reason why or how policing will be improved or even maintained by a mobile facility, the problem of which, of course, is that it can easily be removed, which is the whole point of it. And I'm extremely sceptical about how many residents will complete the online survey, given the very high proportion of my constituents in Bedwardine do not normally or ever choose to communicate by all this online stuff. In essence, this is a petty, penny-pinching, cost-cutting exercise that will save very little money, yet do lasting damage to the residents of the West Side. Although the police post is in Dines Green, it actually serves the whole of the west of Worcester and my constituents in Bedwardine, obviously. It is the only police station in the whole area, and operations from there cover all 3 West Side wards. It is hardly an extravagance, given that it normally houses 1 PC and a few PCSOs. And at this point, I would like to put on record my ongoing thanks to PC Paul Slaymaker, and I can confirm to the Mayor that it is Slaymaker, with whom I have worked closely over many years and productively on criminal and antisocial behaviour issues. Of course, he will be lost to my constituents and others if this closure goes ahead, as the police downsize both their physical and their human presence in the area. Mr. Mayor, the primary purpose of any kind of exercise like this should be about improving policing, not knowingly undermining it. The second issue, of course, is about the nature of policing itself. My long and varied experience leaves me in no doubt that local or community policing is by far the most effective method. By that, I mean taking decisions at the most local level, leaving officers in post long enough so they can get to know the area and, more importantly, the criminals and troublemakers, not only better to catch them and lock them away, but also, as importantly, to deter and prevent crime and antisocial behaviour from happening in the first place, through a visible, informed and knowledgeable police presence. Endless changes of officers prevent the build-up of that vital police resource called local knowledge. People are more likely to report crime and antisocial behaviour and work with the police if they know them and have confidence in them. They can't do that if the officers constantly change every few months, as they all too often do. And of course, Council, the closure of this post will have a damaging psychological impact. The message it sends out is that the police are withdrawing from the locality. They don't want or need a presence in the area, and don't value building up a partnership with the local community, working together to deter and defeat criminality. Just as people are reassured by actually seeing bobbies on the beat, this proposal does exactly the opposite by removing the police and their premises. In addition, the PR aspect of this proposal is that people, both residents and criminals, will obviously and rightly conclude that the police are reducing both their commitment and resources to my ward of Bedwardine and elsewhere in the area. Policing, Mr. Mayor, is not neatly confined to ward boundaries, so removing the police service in Dines Green will have an adverse knock-on effect throughout the West Side. And Mr. Mayor, I will conclude by asking West Mercia Police, through you of course, for their evidence how and why closing this station, this post, will enhance law and order in Bedwardine and elsewhere. In truth, there isn't any evidence, and it obviously won't. There are much better and easier ways to save at least 10 times this piddling amount of money in a top-heavy organisation with a top-heavy headquarters. West Mercia Police should look to themselves, not the residents of the West Side who want to see more police on duty, not fewer. By suggesting a mobile alternative is disingenuous at best. As we all know, it will start with a few days a week, then it will go down to 1 or 2 days a week, with people not knowing when or if it's open, so they won't use it, and after a while, inevitably, it will be withdrawn altogether. So for these reasons, Mr. Mayor, Council, I urge Council to support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Bayliss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be supporting the motion, but I wanted to do my own research on it, and so rather than believe everything that was written by the proposer, I contacted the Police and Crime Commissioner direct and asked him what was the situation. He said, ultimately, there isn't a specific proposal to close it. It's part of a wider strategy that I'm consulting on in terms of safer neighbourhood team bases and gauging public views. He also pointed out to me that he was simply asking for the police force as a whole, covering the whole of West Mercia, to look at its assets to make sure that they are using them in the best possible way to fight crime. And if there were any bases that were not needed, to put that money into frontline policing, which I'm sure we'd all like to see. So I wanted to just pop that on the record, that this is not a proposal, as I suspect the mover knows at this point. It is simply a public consultation on this. I'm willing willing to lend my voice and support to the motion to clearly say that, for the reasons that the seconder pointed out, that these are that this in this case this neighbourhood post is required in Worcester and provides a key service. But I wouldn't want us to get carried away by that this is, defending and against some direct proposal that is there already. It isn't. It's about gauging public views, and I think we can give a pretty clear view from this council that this one should stay.
Thank you very much. I wish to also support this motion. It's interesting what's just been said, actually, that it's nice to hear that the Police and Crime Commissioner is in listening mode, to be honest. That's very encouraging. And I think us having this debate today and us being able to put forward our views will hopefully be taken on board by the Police and Crime Commissioner when they are making this decision following the consultation. And as has already been said, the Dines Green Police Post is an important part of the local community in St John's. And I don't want to see it joining the long list of stations that have been closed. I believe, and I think we all agree with this, that one of the basic things that all government should provide is for the safety and security of its citizens. And the fact is that half of Britain's police stations have been closed in the last 10 years. To put it in a broader context, at least 667 stations with front counters allowing the public to talk to officers, and that's the important bit, have been shut down since 2010. Many were temporarily closed during COVID, and some have not been reopened. And as the seconder has correctly identified, these closures show, I think, that justice is in retreat, and the short-sighted selling of police stations is an invitation for criminals to move in. And there's been a series of incidents across the country which show that the closure of police stations is creating a void into which serious crime now occurs. There was a very distressing incident not that long ago in Birmingham, where a cyclist was knifed to death on a common overlooked by a former station. Now, if that police station had been open and fully operating, then that attack would not have taken place. And Freedom of Information responses from 39 police stations reveal that more than one police station has closed each week since 2010, and there are now fewer than 600 still open across England and Wales. And I know, some people say, well, this kind of old Dixon and Dock Green, sort of blue light model is out of date. But the trouble is, alternative schemes such as virtual police officers are ineffective for people who seek the reassurance of face-to-face contact and the privacy of a police station. If we want community policing, then we absolutely need police stations in the community and somewhere safe for victims of crime to go. Local police stations are a vital symbol which shows that police care about both us and our community. The local police team in Dines Green, who we're meeting on Thursday actually, do excellent work with local people, and this is enhanced by them being at the heart of the community. And there's now a widening gap between the police and the public, and some victims don't feel confident enough to contact the police via telephone or online. And there was a very interesting piece of research I was reading, which literally came out 2 months ago, March 2022, published in the Journal of Public Economics. And it highlighted in up-to-date research the importance of local police stations. It found that local police stations represent an important and visible aspect of law and order, and that visibility is very key. The effect of the closure of local police stations has a direct impact on crime outcomes. The research found an increase in reported car theft and burglary in residential properties when stations were closed. Quite simply, closing local police stations leads to higher crime, and criminals are less deterred by a lower visibility of the local police. So I urge Council to support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding is that the PCC has tasked its team with looking into the most favourable use of all the assets of West Mercia Police. I suppose you could say it goes with the job, really. You'd be castigated if you didn't do that. But he's got to look, obviously, at ensuring the best use of taxpayers' money. At this time, however, not only has no decision been made in relation to the Dines Green station, but there hasn't been a firm proposal either. But that said, I think it's also true to say that the police tell us that the most efficient and effective way of policing our city is by local safer neighbourhood teams. And so they've got to be a permanent feature. They can't be moved here and there around. It won't work. So for those reasons, the idea of such a closure is not one that I would wish to support. Thank you.
Councillor Norfolk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It stands within reason that I am also speaking in support of this motion. Referring to Councillor Mackay's point, the West Mercia Local Policing Charter pledges to make our communities safer and stronger and protect people from harm, promising to provide a bespoke local neighbourhood policing service. A local policing service means exactly that, a safer neighbourhood team embedded in the area they support. Continuing with the Charter, there's a pledge for proactive policing, meaning that the service promises to engage with local residents. I'm not sure in one of the city's most least engaged communities that can be achieved when a community already having to prioritise heating or eating would then also have to face travelling to Castle Street, which, by the way, is only open between 8 AM and 4:30 PM on weekdays and Saturdays, and between 10 AM and 4 PM on Sundays. St John's councillors have regular meetings with PC Slaymaker, as I'm sure councillors for St Clement's and Bedwardine also do. PC Slaymaker's familiarity with the area he polices cannot be underestimated. St John's councillors are working with Paul, for instance, on developing a community speed watch team, working with the police, representing the community on addressing a concern which impacts the neighbourhood, the very definition of proactive policing. We also discuss other matters which are probably best not spoken about in a public arena. Those of us who represent wards west of the river understand the importance the PCSOs who support the university play. I have personal experience of the benefits of asking the PCSOs to step in and address issues raised by residents who are at the end of their tether about the noise that students in accommodation outside of the campuses make, and the beneficial impact of a quiet word in students' ears can have to their neighbours. There is evidence, as Councillor Lamb suggests, to suggest that crime increases with a reduced police presence. There is strong evidence to suggest that a visible police force, engaged with the community they are policing, brings with it an improvement in public confidence in the police, a positive impact on the perception of crime, and a feeling of safety, and just as important, a reduction in crime. I can't help but agree with Councillor Udall in calling this recommendation from the PCC an act of vandalism on a community still recovering from the effects of the pandemic and facing the challenges presented by the cost of living crisis. I echo Richard's invitation to the PCC and would extend the invitation to the Chief Constable. Spend a day in locals' officers' shoes, visit Dines Green and spend time with the community and its representatives. I support this motion and call upon members to also support the motion.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I've got any other speakers, so we'll move to the vote. Councillor Udall, do you want to reply?
Just very briefly, Mr Mayor, I'd like to thank Councillor Amos for his support. He and I have obviously read the same papers which have not been read by other members present tonight, and I'd also like to thank my ward colleagues for their support as well. The public consultation document is quite clear. It says proposals, disposal of Dines Green and replacement by mobile police station. That is the proposal in the consultation document. I can inform you, Mr Mayor, that the same proposal was made for Rubery in North Worcestershire. When local councillors there raised their objections, the proposal was withdrawn. The Police and Crime Commission is saying this was an administrative error. Mr Mayor, I'm looking forward to further administrative errors, and the decision to close Dines Green Police Station will be sent into the dustbin of history.
Thank you. Okay, can we see those in favour of this motion then, please? Those against? Thank you, that's unanimous. So we'll move on to the third motion, protection and engagement with private renters, proposed by Councillor Denham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I won't read out the entirety of the motion, but I think, for the benefit of viewers not in the room. This is about the protection and engagement of private renters and looking about a number of measures to that end. The possibility of serving of compliant notices for excess cold in homes that fail minimum energy efficiency standards, training and information provided to councillors on how the council can help residents in rented properties, an information pack for by the council, including how to access help for private renters and investigate the feasibility of confidential reporting system for tenants. Private renters are growing in number in Worcester and across the UK. I think the national data is something like 1 in 5 households. I actually don't have the up-to-date figures for Worcester, but others in the room may do. As a housing authority, we have a responsibility to ensure all residents are safely and adequately housed. This motion was in part inspired by Generation Rent, which is an organisation who claim to be the national voice of private renters. They have an extensive charter and ask of local authorities, which actually makes really quite interesting reading. When I say extensive, it is 2 sides of A4. So and some of the actions within that Worcester has in place. For example, we do have the licensing of HMOs, at least in some parts of the city. And we do have a page of advice for private renters within the website for those who are able to find their way into it. From surveys and discussion with private renters, Generation Rent have identified a number of important learning points. Renters are unaware of their rights. They have a lack of knowledge around the documentation that they're supposed to receive at the start of a tenancy and the responsibilities that their landlord has to them as private tenants. And renters are unaware of how the local authority can help. And renters would welcome local authority support. They would welcome more guidance from the local authority, and that guidance in the form of more online resources, information packs, improved websites and tenant forums would very much be welcomed. People become private renters without prior education or research. They may not even know who their landlord is. Often it's, they take up a property via leasing agents. And changes in legislation take place. Not everyone can keep up to speed. And in fact, we've heard in questions about some of those changes. Private renters don't know what their rights are, for example, about return of deposit, which can be a really big issue and a problem that not infrequently comes to us. So I look carefully at the shopping list, as it were, of all the proposals from Generation Rent. This motion has been very carefully selected from that. It is a thoughtfully drafted motion to meet the needs that we know exist in the Worcester housing market. This is tailored to what we do and to our city. The suggested actions are deliverable by City Council officers. This is a practical motion which will make a difference to people who live in Worcester. Those people may have no other housing options, and they deserve to know their rights, and they deserve to live in a home that is affordable, safe and secure. I finish with a quote from a recent Public Accounts Committee in the House of Commons that was printed in the May magazine from the LGA. The regulation of private rented found that despite record rent increases, 13% of rented homes pose a serious threat to the health and safety of renters. And they've given a figure for the cost to the NHS of 340 million a year of that threat to the health of individuals. It's too difficult for tenants to ensure their legal right to a safe and secure home, and we as a local authority can do something to help with that and can do something about it. I hope that all councillors feel able to support this motion.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Norfolk.
I'll reserve my right to speak, Mr.
Good.
Mayor.
We got anybody else like to speak? Councillor Stephen.
Yes, I welcome this motion. I think it's a good motion, and I'm very pleased to support it. I'm sure there are a large number of good landlords out there, as well as some very bad landlords. But I do think that for all the good landlords, they should also be supporting this motion, because when you have poor landlords, they bring down the market and they are unfairly competing with the good landlords. And we want to create a level playing field for good standards. And we are supporting good landlords by having this motion, and I'm very pleased to see that. This motion, I think, is very good because what it does is it does something towards redressing the power imbalance between those who rent and those who are the landlords. There are short-term tenancy agreements, there's an imbalance of knowledge, an imbalance of the available money, an imbalance on legal representation. There is also an environmental aspect to this as well. There are many homes which are not meeting even current standards of home insulation and energy security. And, you know, the government, for all its faults, has done some things to try to improve things by having minimum standards of EPC certificates. But if people don't know their rights, they're not asking for their landlord to bring it up to a reasonable standard and to know that they can have it, to have a minimum standard on the EPC certificate. And guess what? They're going to carry on living in a home which is poorly insulated. So it's vital that people know their rights and that there's good communication to enable that to happen. And Councillor Denham has quite rightly said that we should be doing more in terms of outreach and actively promoting good standards. And just as a way of extra suggestions, not just having digital online stuff, but why not have things published in City Life, which goes into every single household, and to leaflet those areas where we know there are potential problems in the city. So yes, very pleased to support it, and I think it's an excellent motion. Thank you.
Councillor Alcott.
Mayor, thank you. I would just like to say I fully support this motion, that there is a world of difference between a good landlord and not such good landlord, shall we say. And I think, I'm one of many. I'm fortunate. I have a mortgage. I have my own home. Many people don't, and they are at the whim of others. And I think all we can do to support them is the right thing to do. I fully support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other speakers. Councillor Denham, do you want to sum up? Oh, you do wish to speak. That's fine.
I just thought I might have my penance, Mr. Mayor, if that's okay. I'd like to talk to begin with by talking about the technical issues of actually getting housing advice from the council website. I took a chance and navigated through the council website recently. We all know and love it, and I don't mean to talk down our website. I think it's a great website, but on the menu are the standard options: about your council, pay it, report it, request it, news, contact us, and more services. Nothing really jumps out on them, even on the sub-menus, as advising private renters how we as their council can help them if they need it. What advice does exist on the website is hard to track down. It signposts tenants to their rights and responsibilities, but not necessarily what we are responsible for. Quite rightly, our page is reliant on other websites to provide up-to-date information, but it needs to be more accessible. We also need to be able to provide information to those of our residents who may not have access to the necessary technology or even necessarily speak English as their first language. It might be me, but I also found it slightly disconcerting that having followed our link from a page to the government site detailing tenants' rights, I was then advised that if I have a complaint about my landlord, to speak to my councillor. Dependent upon the nature of the complaint, I would be heading to the housing department anyway. We need more training on what our councils' responsibilities are. Council was recently informed that there are around 9,000 private rental properties in Worcester. Members have also been informed that there is a social housing crisis happening under our watch, with nearly 3,000 people on the housing list. As more and more of our constituents become private renters, we need to ensure that each of them are aware of their rights, their responsibilities, and where they can get help if they need it. As the organisations we tend to rely on are already very busy dealing with the fallout from the cost of living crisis, we need to build a database of those other volunteer-led organisations which offer help and advice regarding housing to particular demographics within our city and signpost residents to those where appropriate. Councillor Denham's already mentioned the Generation Rent survey which was held in conjunction with 5 district councils, which received feedback from about what some renters would like to see offered by their councils. All are very reasonable asks. Printed leaflets summarising their rights, for instance, a set of contact numbers, easily navigable websites, letter templates, and summary information regarding changes to the law when they become relevant. We rely too much on technical awareness, language skills, and of course people knowing intuitively where to go. Irresponsible landlords need to know we are on the renter's side, and the only way to do that is to ensure renters in Worcester are better informed. I second this motion, and I recommend every other member also gets their hands on the excellent Generation Rents report, Ending the Disconnect, Engaging Local Authorities and Private Renters report.
Thank you. Anything to add, Councillor Denham?
To thank colleagues for their contributions, and I hope that we will have support across all parties for this important measure to ensure that private renters are aware of their rights and that we can support them within the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so those in favour of the motion like to show? Any against? Okay, I'll take that as unanimous. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to the Local Government Boundary Commission rewarding arrangements. I'm going to ask the Corporate Director of Planning and Governance just to say a few words of introduction to this, because I know that there's been some discussions here and there with some people, and not all of us have had necessarily the same comprehensive introduction. So.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will confine my comments just to outlining the procedural matters which have brought this report to Council tonight. Members who are proposing and seconding the paper may wish to speak further. What this report is doing is recommending that the Council approves as a collective response to the Local Government Boundary Commission for England a submission on warding arrangements for Worcester City Council. And this would be, if this is approved, a collective response on behalf of the Council to the first stage of the Local Government Boundary Commission's review as to what the Council's warding arrangements should be. And members will recall that the Boundary Commission has already asked for the Council's views on what the Council's size should be insofar as how many councillors it should have. And in response to that consultation stage, the data exercise, population forecast projected up to 2028, this council approved a submission that proposed that the number of councillors should remain the same as is, 35, the council further submitted that a slightly higher number of councillors, between 36 and 39, could also be supported. Members may be aware that the Commission has subsequently confirmed that it is minded to recommend to Government that this council's size remains as 35 councillors. And consequently, we've moved into the next stage of the review, which is for the Commission to consider what the appropriate warding pattern and electoral arrangements are within the City Council. And for the Commission, that primarily means addressing areas of electoral inequality projected up to 2028 based on population forecasts. So this is very much the Boundary Commission's process in which the Council is invited to be a consultee. If this council submits a collective response, officers propose that that should be a response that enjoys the support of all 4 political groups on the council, because we operate a committee system in a time of no overall control. Therefore, the draft submission that's attached to this report has been prepared in discussion with all 4 political groups. Member and officer workshops have been held, and the document that's been produced attempts to provide a sufficient level of detail to equip the Boundary Commission with the Council's local views as to what is effective in Worcester City, but draws the line at a point where political consensus might diverge. So the submission is quite detailed, but there's a point in the document where it stops and recommends to the Commission a number of options that the Commission may wish to consider further, without ruling on any given option as far as the Council is concerned. And members will also note that because this is the Commission's public consultation, further separate submissions can be made either by individual members or political groups or community groups or whoever wishes. So this is the first stage of the Boundary Commission's warding pattern review. If the Council is able to agree a collective corporate submission tonight, then delegated authority is sought for officers to submit that on the Council's behalf. And then before November, we should know the outcome of that work and whether the Boundary Commission supports our submission or wishes to make different proposals, in which case there will be a further consultation on those proposals, and we will have another opportunity to respond at that point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Leader, are you proposing this?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I'm happy to propose the recommendation that the Council agrees the warding arrangement submission as set out in Appendix 1. As the monitoring officer has said, we've gone through a process involving all groups on the Council, looking at the issues the Council faces in terms of its submission. I think there's broad consensus on the vast majority of the proposals. It shows that we can and do work together quite well in the vast majority of cases. There are a couple of areas where there's some difference of opinion, and we've set those out in the report, and it will be for the Commission and for everybody in Worcester really to have their say on these. So the consultation, I believe, on this one stays open till I think the 25th of July. So I would encourage, clearly, political parties will want to have a view on this, but citizens of Worcester will want to have a view on this too, and community groups and others. So make your representations, but as far as we're concerned tonight, I'm happy to move this recommendation and for it to move on to the next stage of the process.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Councillor Denham.
Thank you. I'm happy to second this motion. I think it's important to be clear what actually we are voting for tonight. The paper we have before us is the Council's submission to the Boundary Commission, and depending on your definition, this is the lowest or the highest common denominator of agreement between political groups. I think all are agreed that Cathedral Ward is too big. Councillor Riaz and I know that better than anyone. We have too many planning applications in our inbox. We have large numbers of licence applications. Have any other wards actually had a pavement licence application, for example? We've had plenty. We get lots of queries, casework, suggestions, and needs from residents with a wide variety of concerns. And Cathedral Ward is still growing. There are living over the shop applications, there are office conversions to residential and brownfield developments. The city centre is a residential area. So this boundary review is very much overdue. But this is not about councillors. Although our identity is tied up with our wards, I am proud and honoured to be the Cathedral Ward councillor. How do I feel about having to choose between being a city centre councillor or a Fort Royal councillor? I have come to love and know all of those communities within Cathedral Ward. But this is about democracy and that every Worcester citizen having a fair deal and equal access to a councillor who will speak up for them and can reply to emails in a timely manner. People know where they live, the street name and the area. They don't necessarily know which ward they live in or who their councillors are. And councillors, I think, need to be careful about our personal interests and our egos within the boundary review. Every one of us, every citizen and every group can put our own detailed response into the Boundary Commission by the 25th of July. No change is not an option. I had the benefit of going to the local government conference last week in Harrogate and actually talking to the Boundary Commission people, and that was really helpful to understand some of their thinking and their process in general principles. There will be a further round of consultation after this that will be based on draft proposals, and that may well be easier for residents and Worcester citizens to engage in. But then the Boundary Commission will decide. It's not for us in this room to decide. So I commend this initial whole council submission to all colleagues, and in particular thank you to the officers for all the work that they have put into this and the detailed thinking which can help us inform our individual responses whilst hopefully signing off this collective cross-party response. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I speak as the councillor, the ward councillor for Warndon Parish South, and I speak to myself, not, you know, there's more than one councillor. I also speak, I should say, as the county councillor for the Warndon Parish Division. Now, as far as the structure of this thing is concerned, I would have preferred for the historic Trotsell Lane, which divides our two divisions, to remain the dividing line. I've got over the years to know a lot of people in Quisters and Turvey, which I'll now be losing to the frozen north. But, you know, I accept that in the scheme of things, that isn't going to be a factor. So I'm not objecting to the proposals. But I do have a concern. I've made submissions, and unless I've missed it, I haven't had a response. And it may be because I've made the submission too early. And I'll tell you what it's all about is my parish, my ward, as I said, is Warndon Parish South. Now, over the years, I would say any number of times, I've had people often in distress from Warndon who have contacted me, and sometimes it's the most hard thing to say, well, look, I know it says Warndon, I know it says parish, but I'm not your councillor. Now, luckily, I've always had a good relationship with Joe Hodges, and we've managed to sort it, but it is an unnecessary problem. The other thing is, the name is Warndon Parish,
But it goes beyond Warndon Parish. We've got, these days, we've got Broad, Heath Meadows and part of Newtown Road, which are all outside the parish. So we've got this further complication. So is there an answer to that? It isn't earth-shattering. This is me personally. I would like to see a return to the north of Warndon Parish Ward, Warndon Parish North, becoming St Nicholas Ward. I'd like to see the Warndon Parish South being based on either Aikenbury or Aikenbury Field, which would allow then the division to be Aikenbury and St Nicholas. I think that would better identify people where they live. And as I listened to what Lynn said, and she's right, people need to identify. Some of these names are a bit odd. Riverside, I mean, where's Riverside, for heaven's sake? So it's not earth-shattering, but I'd like that to be considered. I haven't had a response, so I'm just registering the fact that I've made that request.
Councillor Roberts, when you say you've had no response, do you mean from the Boundary Commission or from the council?
I've made a request at several levels, but I've done it through emails, I've done it online, and I've done it to people within the council.
Okay, yeah. I welcome the proposals. I'm obviously going to refer to Warndon Villages, like my fellow councillor in Warndon Villages, Councillor Andy Roberts. What I would say is, yes, the boundaries are quite sensible. Trots Hill Lane has always been a natural boundary in Warndon Villages, which seems to work. It's important that Warndon Villages retained its 4 councillors, because we do have it is a very, very large area, and it is about 3 to 4 miles in length if you take the Warndon Villages, so it would be too big for one single ward. I agree that properties have to move from south into north to balance it out. What it will mean, though, it will mean that Warndon Village is unique in terms of Warndon City, in terms that it's divided into villages. And when you are doing campaigning and focusing on people, we tend to do things on the basis of villages. The proposals will split 2 villages, but I think that is actually manageable. Certainly, I think if the ward boundaries can be aligned to the parish boundaries, that would have a practical benefit. I'm putting my Warndon Parish hat on here. In terms of, for example, one of my responsibilities as a parish councillor is to look at the planning applications for our council planning group and that. And I know we do get, we identify them by wards normally on the list. And some of the ones in Warndon Parish South are actually outside the parish boundaries. And that can sometimes cause a bit of confusion when some of our parish councillors start to think about, oh, we'll make a comment about this, not actually realising that it's actually outside the parished area and therefore not within the domain. So therefore, I think if it says parish on the ward boundary, it should be what it actually says on the tin, parish. Just one further thing about Welton City as well. I'm disappointed with the name City Centre Ward. I think it's a bit unimaginative, to be honest with you. It sounds a bit corporate and bland. Can we come up with something better? Perhaps something like the Sabrina Ward, representing the fact it followed the river or something. Just a bit of thought anyway. But thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor. Although City Centre seems to say what it says on the tin, which I think is what you said earlier. I'm not hearing any proposals for amendments to what the report says at the moment. Is that right? So the opportunities are there, as been outlined, to make other representations through other means. Councillor Bayliss, do you want to sum up where we're up to?
I'd just like to move it to the vote now, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, those in favour then, please shout. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Great, thank you very much. So moving on then, item 9, some amendments to the Constitution, and there's an amendment to the amendments to the Constitution. The issue of the Income Generation Subcommittee is being withdrawn at the moment. So if you'd like to take that one out. Monitoring Officer, do you have anything to say on this one?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to clarify that the scheme of delegation at the Council permits the Monitoring Officer to make some amendments to the Constitution where they are minor and non-material, and any matters which are effectively policy changes come to full Council for decision. So there are there are three amendments proposed tonight which have been discussed with group leaders. One is an amendment to clarify, and what I should say is all these amendments would serve to regularise the way the Council is actually currently operating. So effectively, one amendment will remove from the articles the current restriction that prevents group leaders from serving on Standards Committee. That's not a rule that the Council has been observing, so that rule has fallen into obsolescence. So it's proposed that rule is removed. The renaming of Income Generation Subcommittee has been withdrawn, subject to further discussion with Chair and Vice Chair and the Subcommittee. And my apologies for that. That's a confusion on my part. The next amendment which is proposed is to clarify that it's a member that chairs the Joint Consultative and Safety Committee, not the Managing Director, as the published terms of reference currently state. And finally, that to clarify the long surviving principle that the Council's nomination for Joint Advisory Panel for Chair should be the Council's Chair for the time being of Place and Economic Development Committee. So those amendments will bring the Constitution up to date with the way the Council is currently operating.
Thank you. We need a proposer for that. Councillor Alcott.
Mayor, thank you. I'd just like to thank the Monitoring Officer for tidying up the Constitution and to propose the motion. Thank you.
And is that seconded?
Yes, I formally second that.
Thank you, Councillor Stephen. Are there any questions or issues about this? No, we'll go straight to the vote then. Those in favour? Against? Abstentions? That's good. That's done. Thank you very much. Then we move on to the Chair of Policy and Resources, the referral report from the previous committee, actually, I think, on Treasury Management Annual Report.
Mr Mayor, thank you. Happy to propose the report. Just a couple of comments, if I may. Say finance officers and members on various committees have been working in a unique environment for the last few years. Members will be aware that careful and exhaustive consideration has been given to investment opportunities and sensible decisions have been taken with regard to the use of the taxpayers' money. This Council's prudent use of the public purse is to be commended, and in a time of global fiscal turbulence, it's reassuring that our finances are managed in such a responsible way. So I'm perfectly happy to propose the report.
Is that seconded? Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to formally second the proposal. In the absence of Councillor Bissett, who is Chair of Policy and Resources, and I hope she makes a swift recovery from COVID.
Thank you. I was particularly struck by the expression ping-demic in the report. Those in favour of accepting that report? Anyone against? Abstentions? No. Great. Thank you very much. Right. So we move on to a further referral report, this time from Communities Committee on the artificial grass pitch. Councillor Riaz.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to formally recommend this proposal to full council. One of the major facts that this report is before you is that the FA are willing to contribute a significant amount to this project as a major reason why we are considering it. We recognise there is a need for provision, and we have known for years that the issues have always been about the costs involved up at Purdey's Bell. Many would argue That was debated at communities, that the cost of living, that the 200k could have been spent elsewhere. However, I would disagree. Part of our role is to ensure that we bring the best provision to the city when we have the opportunity to do so. And we have a prime opportunity here today to ensure we can bring a brand new, much needed facility to the premier sports destination within the city at a quarter of the price to the taxpayer. Like we have debated before already in committees, it is crucial that the facility really is available to all grassroots football clubs and recreational users and girls football teams alike. I would also like to see kids from poorer areas and from primary schools where the city have no access to these facilities to get priority access as a result. And I will ensure, as chairman, that they are written into the SLA when we draw up if this facility gets approved. I urge the council to support the recommendations set out in this report and sends out a clear signal to the City of Worcester that we are determined to be at the forefront of investment to improve the health and well-being of our residents through sport.
Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Cleary.
I formally second this and I don't wish to speak.
Thank you. Anybody got anything to say? Councillor Lawrenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to do a U-turn on this since first discussing it as a new member of the Communities Committee on the 8th of June. My decision is nothing to do with negative online messages and everything to do with the fact that I've discussed this proposal again with fellow Green councillors and the officer responsible for managing the project. I have received further assurances regarding the current pitches, the effect on the local environment of the proposal, and the council's ability to repay the loan. Therefore, I will be supporting the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. With all building products, there is innovation and improving sustainability options. And traditionally, this kind of pitch is actually a little bit unenvironmental. But what's brilliant is that the industry themselves are becoming more and more sustainable as time goes on. Issues are with raw materials, end-of-life recycling and the infill that's used, which currently is tyres. And what FIFA are recommending now is biodegradable infills, which are based on cork or bark or polyester and things that won't damage the environment when they come off the pitch. And also when they get in your clothes, you won't take them home and you end up with black bits in the wash, which is quite irritating. So I would just like officers, when they're tendering this, to really try and see if we can be really innovative and obviously to the correct standards so that it's recognised for the sport, but to see whether we can be, as in all our policy, as environmental as possible. Thank you.
Mayor, thank you. I don't want to be negative, but I just want to comment, obviously looking back at the history of Purdiswell, we've had some quite contentious issues there in the past. And I recall that Worcester City Football Club put in for planning permission, which part of it is in the same area as this, which we refused, I think, and then they were then granted on appeal. So it just concerns me a little that we're not always being consistent in our approach to sporting facilities within the city. I'd just like to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, and I'm sure the leader will remind me if I'm wrong, but I think that we've got still an extant policy that says all issues such as this around Purdiswell come to full council. Okay. Anybody else? Right, we'll move to vote on that and agree that. Everyone in favour? Against? And abstentions? 2. Thank you very much. And then the referral report from P&R on revenues and benefits management contract. Councillor Denham.
Yes, thank you. This was discussed at P&R only last night. Very much welcome this proposal. I mean, the decision about termination of the revenues and Ben's management contract was actually made in December. So the paper that we are bringing today is to move that process forward, and the decision that the service, when it comes in-house into the public sector, those staff will be employed by Malvern Hills District Council and provide a service for South Worcestershire. It will be wonderful to have this service back inside the public sector family and able to be focused on providing public service. I hope that full council will be in support. Thank you.
You should usually put your phones on silent during the meetings, but never mind. We have nearly finished. Have we got a seconder for that? Councillor Stanley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am happy to second the report and its proposal, and would echo the comments of
Thank you. We vote to receive that report. Those in favour? That looks like everybody. Thank you very much. Okay. Then a report on joint leader on any matters of which is of the opinion require urgent consideration by the council.
None, Mr. Mayor.
I'm not aware of any items which are exempt, so I think we don't need to move that motion, and we can call the meeting to a close.
I enjoyed Ian Cragen's rack and talk period today, but I'd share with you that I've spent the whole day avoiding the cricket score so I could go and watch it live tonight. So would you thank him for telling me the score?